Folks at home, welcome back to the Crimson Oak Pond, home of these aggressive tiger bass, as well as a variety of other wildlife, including a pair of bald eagles who have been the star of the show recently. And I'm happy to see that we finally had one of the eagles show up at the nest that we built for them. But you can tell by the head on this eagle that it's a juvenile, and probably one of the offspring to the pair that are living out here. And we're also going to be seeing a showdown between Chip and the mouse that we call Gus Gus, as well as some other things that I really can't explain. And if you missed the last video, we built a new shop out here at the farm. You'll be getting an update on that as well. But if you guys recall, over 2 years ago when we built this pond, I created this cove that was full of structure, including a lot of pieces from the fallen oak tree, and we named it Bonnie's Bayou. And as most of you all know, Bonnie and Clyde were the original two bass that got this whole thing started. But when we built Bonnie's Bayou, we were strictly focusing on the fish and everything that was living underneath the surface of the water. But we quickly realized that this little cove was going to be one of the hot spots on the farm for a big variety of wildlife, including white-tailed deer, ducks, coyotes, owls, raccoons, possums, and even skunks. And we've had a camera rolling here in Bonnie's Bayou 24/7 for over 2 years now. So I wanted to take a quick second to show you this wide variety of wildlife, as we've gotten some pretty incredible clips over the years. And it all got started before we even filled the pond up with water, as the first visitor to Bonnie's Bayou was the owl that we call Hooter. And before the pond filled up, Hooter would use this as hunting grounds to chase those little field mice. And this owl became a regular throughout the entire pond build project. But the second one to show up was another fan favorite, and that's the possum that we call George Jones. And as we started filling the pond up, the white-tailed deer began using Bonnie's Bayou as a watering hole, and as you'll see here in a minute, it eventually even became a swimming hole. And this quickly became a popular spot. Even the bucks were fighting over this new territory. And this is also when we first met one of my personal favorites, the skunk that we call Pepe Le Pew. We also began to get visits from a variety of birds, as you see a red-tailed hawk also chasing those mice around. And after a month of pumping water in, we filled the bottom layer of this cove up. And new life began to show up, including a pair of fawns. But things weren't always easy for these little guys, as they spent most of their early days running from the coyotes. But just like most of the other wildlife, this coyote loved this area so much, he even lifted his leg to claim it as his spot. And throughout the year, more and more whitetails started showing up, making this one of the most active spots on the farm. And we got excited when ducks started flying in. This was the first little guy to show up, and you can tell by the way he's swimming, zigzagging, flapping his wings, that he's one happy little guy, even spinning around in circles. And once our daughter found out that all the wildlife were hanging out in this area, she wanted to make them happy and keep them well fed. And as I mentioned earlier, Bonnie's Bayou also became a swimming hole, but we were a little confused about what the doe was doing swimming in the water, because as you can see, she's actually swimming in circles, and it seemed to us like she was trying to get away from a predator or one of those coyotes. And that was a popular theme right here in this area. Even with a big group of bucks, whenever the coyotes would come around, they would all get spooked and run off. But as you'll see in some of these clips, coyotes have a really good nose and spend a lot of time smelling this area. But let's just say things didn't always go the coyote's way when it came to hunting the white-tailed deer. Here you can see the coyote coming from the top of the screen, closing the distance on some of the deer, and the bottom two on the left are actually fawns. The doe is completely unaware until the last second when the coyote is within feet away. And that's when that mama's instinct kicks in and she runs the coyote off. But what's interesting is that the coyote comes back and even has another partner join up, but as you can see, Mama runs both of them off. So good job, Mama Doe. And as the cove continued filling in, we started getting more and more new species, including a family of raccoons. And this cove was a perfect setup for the raccoons. You got water, an abundance of food, trees nearby, and they would have probably made this place home, again, if it wasn't for the predators. But this particular coyote was unique, and was solid black, which is pretty rare for coyotes. And throughout the nights, you'd often see those raccoons down there feeding on the water's edge, grabbing those little snails and bait fish and whatever they could get their little paws on. And another visit from Pepe Le Pew, as well as some more bucks fighting. And I also like to set up time lapses in Bonnie's Bayou to watch all the wildlife move around with that lit up sky back behind them. And out here at the farm, you can see the stars really good, and that makes for an incredible backdrop. I'd even go back through and take some still shots. You gotta admit, that's a pretty cool photo. Another visit from the black coyote. I always found it interesting how observant they were, especially with their nose. I think they spent a lot of time smelling the wildlife trails, and could probably even figure out what type of animals were using that area. And right around late January and early February, the whitetail rut begins, and you'll see the bucks rutting and chasing the does around. And this particular buck was really confused when the does he was chasing all of a sudden turned around and started running back towards him. And you guys can already guess who's coming, the Wile E. Coyote. But our feathered friends also enjoyed this cove. There's a nice shot of an egret with a big hawk flying back behind him. But I can't tell you guys how happy I was when my favorite bird of all, the bald eagle, showed up for the very first time. And when they're sitting down on the ground, you can see how massive they are compared to all the other birds. But at this point, we saw how interested the wildlife were, so we started building houses for them, starting with the owl house. And the owls immediately began using it. And here's a rare daytime shot of Hooter. And that's because they typically only come around at night when they're hunting. And here's one of my all-time favorite hunting clips of Hooter. If you'll notice, that shining eyeball on the left is a little bunny rabbit. And at the moment, Hooter's got his back turned towards us and is slowly creeping up on the rabbit. But as he gets close, he notices movement from a whitetail and pauses to turn around and see what it is. And at this point, he's very close, but seems to be distracted by all the movement from the deer. And now he finally decides to start closing that last little distance. But if you'll notice, the bunny rabbit is as still as can be and never moves. And even that shining eyeball kind of disappears. And at this point, I think the owl can no longer see him and starts easing down the brush line. And just when the rabbit was in the clear, he turns around and hops even closer to the owl. And again, the owl closes his distance and is ready to pounce and has to be within 1 foot of the bunny rabbit. But the rabbit remains still and does not move and fools the owl for the second time. But that's all the chances the owl's getting tonight as little Peter Cottontail hops away. And the owl flies back to his perch and reminisces on how good things could have been. And when you own a farm, these are two guys that you're probably not happy to see. But these two actually grew up on this farm, and we call them Hakuna and Matata. And they arrived here as little piglets, and we'd often see them chasing each other around out there in the fields. But they disappeared for a year, and when they came back, they had both gotten massive. So wherever they went off to eat, had an abundance of food for them. And as Bonnie's Bayou filled up with water, more birds started showing up, including this pair of geese, and they would come and go throughout the seasons, and even hang out here at night. So at this time, we had been watching the owl come in for about a year, and we're excited to see a second owl show up, and that's when the fans named him Al Capone. And you could see these two hit it off right away, and spent their days hanging out on the owl house, and flopping around out here in the fields. And when I first saw this, I was a little bit confused and worried that one of them was injured, until I realized that they were just taking a dust bath. That's how they clean themselves. You can tell by that big pile of dust that he just shook off. But it was pretty common to see Hooter or Al Capone out here in the peanut fields, chasing the little field mice. But one particular night, we got a little worried, because the owl went from the hunter to being hunted. You can see the Wile E. Coyote spots him, and is coming in at that perfect angle where the owl can't see him coming. And I was watching this clip live, and got pretty worried for our little friend, because you can see he's sneaking up on a little mouse, while the coyote's closing the distance on him. But the coyote disappeared off the screen, and a couple minutes later popped out right in front of him. And the two of them seemed to be friendly to each other, so the owl wasn't getting hunted after all. Now the next visitor to show up was a duck that we called Romeo. And we loved Romeo because he probably had the biggest personality out of all the wildlife to pass by. And he got the name Romeo because when he first showed up, he was the only duck in the pond, and he would sleep at night in the middle of the pond, hanging out beside one of the decoys. But Romeo just wanted to spend his nights in peace. But Hooter and Al Capone had other plans, as they were the dominant birds in the area at night. And as you'll see, Hooter and Al Capone made several low-flying passes trying to get the duck, and each time, Romeo would dip down underwater, avoid the attack, and then come up flapping his wings at him, almost like he was trying to say, "You're not going to intimidate me." But this went on and on for several nights, until Hooter and Al Capone finally gave up on the attack and left him alone. And one of the next things we introduced to Bonnie's Bayou was what we called the peanut picnic table. We'd put a variety of different nuts out on the table and watch all the wildlife come up to eat. And here's a good shot of the family of raccoons feeding along the banks. You can see them working those little paws, feeling around for snails and different meals, right there on the edge of the water. But the peanut picnic table gave us a new, up-close look at all the wildlife that passed by. There's a good shot of the eagle taking a sip of water. Even got some topwater action as the bass are chasing bait. And the buzzards, or in this case maybe vultures. And out of all the wildlife, the blue heron is my least favorite because they're such good hunters. When they fly in at night, your fish population's gonna take a hit. But there's a cool shot of a buck crossing by, and if you'll notice on the stump right back behind him, the blue heron is perched up right beside the Bonnie's Bayou sign, and he hunkers down there to ride out the storm. But I really like these up-close shots. You can see a doe passing through with a full moon going down in the background, and a bachelor group of bucks, but we always found it so funny that the deer would cross the cove through the water rather than just walking about 15 yards to go around it on land. So whitetail truly believe in straight line, shortest path. And this particular afternoon we had a flock of geese fly in, and another really good hunter snagging a fish, that's the osprey. And just like most farms, all the bucks hang out in a bachelor group and till the rut. But here's another really good hunter and a guy that made this pond home, and that's the kingfisher. And here we are 2 years later with the bald eagles walking through Bonnie's Bayou. And when we built Bonnie's Bayou, we only had the fish in mind, but I sure am happy to see all the other wildlife enjoying it. So I was hanging out at my brother's house this week, and he recently rescued a dog named Bella. And he told me he was having trouble finding a dog food that Bella liked. So I wanted to give Sundays for Dogs a shot because if you've watched the videos over the past few months, every dog we've put it in front of has devoured it. And happy to say, Bella loved it too. Sundays for Dogs is a fresh dog food made from a short list of ingredients, including 90% meat, 10% vegetables, and 0% synthetic nutrients. It's the beef flavor, and it looks and smells just like beef jerky. And since Sundays puts all their dog food through an air drying process to preserve the flavor and nutrition, it doesn't require refrigeration or preparation, just pour and serve. It's made with high quality ingredients like beef, chicken, turkey, pumpkin, and premium fish oils, so it's full of flavor. They've also designed the bag with a Velcro seal that makes it very easy to store away and keeps it fresh. And Sundays was founded and ran by a veterinarian that spent years getting the recipe dialed in, and they ship it directly to your door. So if you're interested in trying them out, go to sundaysfordogs.com/BamaBass, and you can get 50% off your first order. So go check out Sundays for Dogs, and let's keep them pups happy and healthy, folks. And now that we're caught up to current day, we got some exciting news as one of the eagles finally flew into the nest that we built for him a couple months ago. And as you can tell by the mixed colored head, this one is a juvenile that was probably just flying over, but had to stop by for a little snack. And when we built the nest a couple months ago, we were hoping that the two bald eagles that are living at the pond would take over it and use it for their nest this year. And before the nest was there, they used the tower pretty often, but once we put the nest in, they shied away, and we weren't sure if they thought it was another bird that was nesting right here, or if they just needed some time because the platform had changed so much. But I also read somewhere that sometimes eagles will use the same nesting site for their entire life, and some of you eagle guys out there can let me know if that's true or not. So there is a potential that that pair would never nest here anyways. So that got me pretty excited when the juvenile showed up, because after all, he may not have built his nesting site yet, and could be a potential candidate for this one. But after he finished up his little snack, he hopped over to investigate our work. Maybe it's just me, but it looks like he's actually analyzing it and giving it a good look over, and it even seems like he's filling it out to see how sturdy it is and if it needs any improvements. But the fact that this eagle even stopped by to consider it makes me happy, and gives me hope that one day there might be some little eaglets in the nest, and a full-time live stream for you all to watch it. And while Mama and Daddy Eagle aren't interested in the nest, they're absolutely interested in the bluegills and tilapia. And some of the tilapia may not survive some of this really cold weather, which is exactly what the bald eagles are wanting to see. That's what got them to permanently move in last year when they saw the abundance of tilapia and had easy meals every day. And if you missed the last video, we built a 50 by 72 shop and got the exterior completely built out, and we'll be beginning the interior build soon. And we got to enjoy it for about 2 days because just like every other project we do out here at the farm, the moment it gets finished, we have these massive flooding rains come through to terrorize everything. So I did everything that I had time to do before the rains. We installed gutters to pipe some of the water away from the building, and we put a few rows of sod down around the slab. But as you can see with the slope of the land, all the water came rushing downhill. And even though the roll-up doors were closed, the water rushed up over into the slab, filling it with mud, dirt, and water, which isn't a major deal, just going to require some cleanup. But the reason a lot of this is left unfinished is because we're adding another slab as an entry ramp right here into these 2 garage doors. And the plan is to put a little catch basin in right here on the right of the slab that'll be tied to a drain pipe that's going to help carry the flow of the water under the slab and out and around the other side of the building. And you can see over here we already had the pipe installed, and a lot of water did flow through it, but it couldn't handle the volume from those floods. but at least it's consistent with all our projects. Water is going to cause problem one way or the other. And this is our duck Echo that flew back to the pond after being gone for a year, and she's been very lonely sitting out here at the pond all by herself. But look who got a new friend when this guy showed up. And right away, I'm going to have to say that he's got some striking similarities to Romeo, the duck that we hadn't seen here in over a year. But wouldn't that be wild if Echo left for over a year and Romeo left for over a year and both met back up at the pond at the same time? But these two are just as happy as can be. Echo's been following him around everywhere he goes. And who knows, we may even have some duck babies coming soon. But the true test to find out if it's Romeo or not will be to watch those nighttime cameras and see if Hooter or Al Capone takes a shot at him, and then we'll know for sure. But he was tested right after he got in the pond, as the bald eagles were flying over, and you can see the two ducks back in the background. They're swimming around in circles and don't seem to be too concerned with the eagle. But here's a good overhead shot of them. They spend most of their time cruising down the banks, sticking their beaks down in the mud, stirring things up looking for food. But I'm happy to see these two little guys keeping each other company. But here's one I'm not happy to see, and that's Mr. Cormorant. But even for those birds I don't like showing up, I still like to observe their characteristics because you always learn so much from these videos. And in these videos, you'll learn how shockingly fast a cormorant is. So this is playing at normal speed, and it's almost like the cormorant can hit a turbo boost when it's underwater. But pay attention right as it goes by the limb. It snags a little small bluegill, and the really surprising thing is that it kills it, but it doesn't eat it. Because if you notice, the bluegill's floating on the surface right there beside him. So I'm not sure if it was the fins on a bluegill that a cormorant doesn't like, but that fish definitely wasn't too big for it, because cormorants can eat a bass up to 2 and 3 pounds. And if a flock of cormorants ever makes it to your pond, they can wipe out a fish population quick. And it's easy to see how with that blazing underwater speed. Alright, now let's go check in on Cedar Falls and see what's going on beneath the surface of the water. We've been periodically doing fish feedings to see if the smallmouth bass and the spotted bass will come up and eat. And right now they're eating good, but they're still a little bit camera shy. The smallmouth's still hanging around the rocks and tunnels. And we got some good topwater action. And let's see how these fish react when we release 1,000 golden shiners. It's gorging time. That's how you know they're full, when there's literally hundreds swimming around them and they turn their nose down. But here's a good look at Spot, the spotted bass. As we mentioned in the last video, he's most likely getting relocated to the backyard pond before the spring. A lot of you guys suggested using a cast net to get him out. I'm going to give that a shot, but it's going to be hard during the winter time because when the water gets cold, all the bass sit down on the bottom of the pond because that's where the warmest water is. So we may have to use the old trusted fishing pole method. But one way or the other, I think we can get him. There's another good shot of Smalley. He's full too. So many of those shiners swam right into his cave, and he's eating all he could. And another good look at the 3 tilapia. You don't often see all 3 of them together, but so far they're surviving these colder temps. We can't forget about our little guy Truman in the wetland filter. He's always got a big appetite like Moby. So I took a trip down into the swamp behind the pond, and that's when a light bulb went off. So as I was looking around at all this vegetation, I noticed it was the same exact vegetation that we had showing up in the 5-acre pond earlier this year. The stuff that looks like dollarweed, as well as the cattails over here. And the last piece of the puzzle was the deer tracks right here in the mud. So it makes perfect sense that the deer are walking through the swamp and carrying little pieces of vegetation up to the pond in their hoofs. But I wanted to check out the swamp area because after we got all the rainfall the past couple weeks, I knew the water levels would be high, which gives you a unique way to capture some wildlife footage. So we got some really deep areas, which is going to funnel all the wildlife up through the shallow trails. So I'm working my way down through here, setting up cameras in those shallow areas where I know the wildlife's going to be. And when I set this camera, this land was completely dry, and now it's over the top of my foot. I wish I would have brought the crawfish traps with me. But I love walking down through here. You never know what you're going to see. Check out the old fallen cedar that's hollowed out in the trunk. That's probably where George Jones lives. So now let's roll through some footage and see what lives down here in the swamp. First up, we got a buck crossing the creek, and he either spots or smells the camera and knows something is out of place. There's the wily coyote. You don't always see them in the daytime. He spots the camera immediately and shies away from it and knows something's not right. And we got Chip collecting any acorns floating down the creek. And hey, there's our 2 little fawns. Man, they're growing up quick. But pay attention to how slick their coat is in this shot compared to a week later. Man, I'm getting busted by everything. My scent's giving all the new camera locations away. There we got a doe navigating the deep water at night. And the little babies coming up, smelling the camera too. You can always tell it's them by their short little snouts. So the camera locations are working out just as intended. It's funneling all the wildlife through a couple trails. And hey, look at there, we got the family of raccoons feeding along the water's edge. Now this is a week later, and if you'll notice, the fawns have put on their winter coat, which is a lot fluffier, and it almost looks like they gained 10 pounds each. And hey, look who it is. The old floppy-eared doe. Every time we've seen this doe on camera, both of her ears are folded back over. It's usually one side or the other, but never both of the ears folded back, and also permanently. Mr. Buck Deer moving through right when the sun's going down, another indicator that the rut hadn't started yet. But the food around here must be getting scarce when the coyotes are out moving during the daytime. Mr. Raccoon looking for another tree to sleep in. And Spike Lee walking through the creek until he got spooked by something. Look at the raccoon playing in the water. It's weird how he's got a glow on him that's following him around. And I'm guessing the coyote's back because these deer are on the move. And one last little fawn catching up with the group. So when I was looking out across the pond after we had that last big storm, I noticed something was off right there around the oak throne area. But luckily, the sign floats and washed up here on the bank. Gonna have to get it cleaned up and mounted back. And now that the weather's cooled off, there's been quite a lot of activity over here at the squirrel house. So during the daytime, Chip has taken over, and although he's bouncing all over the place, jumping in and out, he's thinking about settling down in the new house. He still does his inspections from time to time, just getting acquainted with everything. Even stopping to scratch an itch. But at night, it's a whole different story because Gus Gus has basically moved in. And I wish I could tilt the camera a little to the left because Nate actually built a bed here, and that's where Gus Gus spends most of his time. So the next time I look inside the house, I'll be interested to see if he's built any type of nest over there. But up until this point, the two had been using the house. Chip in the daytime, Gus Gus at night. And now we're about to see their first encounter with each other. Chip stopping by on his morning routine, and surprised to see Gus Gus laying in there in the bed. But Gus Gus seems to have staked his claim and ran him off. But that was only temporary. Chip comes back with a better plan. That was wild. We gotta replay that in slow motion to see exactly what happened. So it starts off with Gus Gus leaping out of the bed at Chip, but the squirrel's reflexes are way faster, and he jumps over the top of Gus Gus, and then attacks from behind. Now that he's got Gus Gus out of his house, he comes back in to inspect it. But just when you think things couldn't get any crazier at the new squirrel house, look who shows up. Now, of all the different things that could enter this house, I never once would have imagined that a cat would do it. This house is mounted high up in a tree out in the woods, but somehow Mr. Kitty Cat found it. The one thing that comes to mind is how lucky Gus Gus is that Chip ran him out of there, because if he would have been in there, he would have had zero chance of escaping when the cat showed up. And there's two that couldn't be happier to be living the farm life. Oliver and Sarah got a new Jeep and are putting some miles on it. Alright folks, going to do a little cold weather fishing today. I got a little small swim bait. Every time we catch one, we're going to scan it to see if it's been caught before. And if it hadn't, we're going to tag it with this pit tag injector. But I'm pretty confident these fish have moved out deep right here on the dam in the deepest part of the pond with this cooler weather, because that's where the warmest water is. Let's see if we can catch one. There we go. Got him right there off the bottom. The little guy probably hadn't been tagged. It has been tagged. 32303. It weighs 1.34, 13 inches long. Alright, so I went to add this fish in the spreadsheet, and he actually doesn't have a name yet. And if you'll notice, the last three letters that I have in the spreadsheet are E, I, and N. So leave some names down below that start with those letters, and we'll try to finish this spreadsheet up. So here's a little tip for fishing in the wintertime. You want to fish as slow as possible because the fish are sitting down there on the bottom. So when you cast out, let it sink all the way to the bottom. And then as you start reeling, even when you think you're reeling about the right speed, slow it down just a tad, because that'll keep that bait sitting right there on the bottom, and when you bring it by their mouth, that's when you have the best chance of getting them. Just like that. Feels like a little guy. Yep. See, even this little bitty bass was sitting right down there on the bottom. That one was born this spring. Probably a little too small to tag. Ooh, got a little closer to the bank. A little better fish right here. Yes, sir. Got that dark line down them. The lateral line. All right, this one's been caught. 570599. It weighs 2 pounds even. 14.5 inches. All right, this fish is named Popeye, and it had been almost a year since I caught it. It gained a little over half a pound, and its relative weight is at 122%, which is pretty good, so happy to see that. Got him. Out there real deep. Yeah, let's put up a little fight. Running right at me. Oh yeah. Nice chunky one. Wow, we got one that has not been caught. It's a good one too. All right, this fish's tag is going to be 2232711. 1.89 pounds. There we go. That's a good one. Oh, yes, sir. That's what we're talking about right there. Putting up a fight. I need to loosen my drag a little bit. Come on in here, big gal. Biggest one of the day. Over 2 pounds for sure. It's a nice one. All right, this fish is 69920, weighing in at 2.40 and 15.5 inches. All right, love to see him looking that shape. Little raccoon track. And this fish is named Zip. 4th time I've caught it, and I even caught it 1 month ago. Each time I catch it, it gains weight, and its relative weight is at 118%. Another good one. What we got? Acting weird. Pretty good one though. Not bad. It's a long fish. Alright, this fish is 32545. It weighs 220. And this is Yogi. 3rd time I've caught it. It's gained over a half a pound since last July, and relative weight at about 120%. All good signs. And if you made it this far in the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button to follow along with our pond series as well as all the wildlife that shows up. Hope y'all enjoyed this one, and we will see you all next time.